Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I am Munib Hamid with the news of this hour. Let's begin with the headlines first. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan has urged the leaders of Muslim states to act collectively to counter Islamophobia. In a letter to Muslim leaders, Khan said Islamophobia in the West is causing widespread concern amongst the Muslims. The OIC has also condemned French politicians' remarks encouraging the publication of anti-Islamic caricatures under the ruse of freedom of expression. Pakistan has rejected illegal amendments to land ownership laws introduced by India in occupied Kashmir. In a statement, the Foreign Office said such actions are aimed at changing the region's demography in violations of UN resolutions. On Tuesday, the Indian Home Ministry notified new laws allowing non-residents to buy land in the occupied territory. Pakistan's Army Chief General Qamar Javed Bajwa has urged the armed forces to remain vigilant in the wake of recent terror attacks in the country. He was specifically referring to the martyrdom of 8 children in an IED explosion at a ceremony in Peshawar on Tuesday. He said the enemies launched the terror attack on the day when Kashmiris around the world were observing a Black Day against the Indian occupation. The Army Chief made these remarks during his visit to the Malakan division, where he inquired after the Tuesday attack victims' health. Well, these were the top stories. News is coming in detail after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Now let's have the news in detail. We'll start from Pakistan, where the Prime Minister Imran Khan has urged the leaders of the Muslim states to act collectively to counter Islamophobia. In a letter to the Muslim leaders, Khan said Islamophobia in the West is causing widespread concern amongst Muslims. The OIC has also condemned the French politician's remarks encouraging the publication of anti-Islamic caricatures under the ruse of freedom of expression. Details in this report.
The rise in Islamophobia in the West, particularly in Europe, has sent shockwaves across the Muslim world, with Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan saying that marginalization of Muslims is giving rise to radicalization and increasing space for extremists on all sides. He called on Muslim leaders to sensitize the larger world to basic principles of Islam guided by peace and tolerance. The issue surfaced earlier this month following the beheading of a teacher in France who showed blasphemous cartoons to his pupils. France's President Emmanuel Macron honored the teacher and pledged to introduce measures that largely target Muslims. His statement drew widespread criticism from the Muslim world, with Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Iran and Bangladesh condemning the offensive caricatures and attempts to link Islam with terrorism. France has Western Europe's largest Muslim population, and some accuse the authorities of using secularism to target them.
Well, and now to talk more on this, we have been joined by Ambassador Tehmeena Janjua. You're also the former Foreign Secretary of Pakistan. Ms. Janjua, how can the Muslim world respond to the growing Islamophobia in the West, particularly in Europe?
Well, the current Islamophobia in Europe is obviously the current wave that is there, which has been sparked off by the comments made by President Macron of France, have obviously has their very local, domestic reasons for doing so. It is the reason why he's tried to generalize a terrorist attack to sully and to attack Islam is only in an effort to ensure that he can get some of the right-wing votes on his own side. Reference of the rhetoric about French traditions for free speech is potently and patently nonsense. He is unable to, but it must be clear that President Macron will not be able to succeed with his present propaganda, because neither the right wing will be impressed, and many of his left-wing voters will also will sort of lose faith in him. The important thing for us is that we must have a rational response to what Macron has said. We must condemn terrorism, we must condemn violence, but we must all very rationally project the case of Islam and of Muslims. And that's the most important in order to deal with the question of Islamophobia, whether in Europe or elsewhere in the world.
Absolutely. And Ms. Janjua, do you feel there is a lack of awareness on parts of those who are propagating Islamophobia?
Well, the fact is that yes, there is obviously a lack of information on the part of some of the people who are working on these issues of Islamophobia. But the most important thing is that we must remember that any kind of satire that Charlie Hebdo, when it made its publications with those very rejectable cartoons, was basically doing something which it said was satire. It is not satire. That the publisher of that article, of those cartoons in that time, was later hanged under the Nuremberg trials for having done these derogatory items against the Jews. Hence, we must have a very legal, a very strong case that we need to project internationally in order to be able to present to the rest of the world the reality. It is not just a matter of feelings of the Muslims that are hurt, which of course they are hurt, and I feel equally hurt about it. But at the end of the day, we must have a very, we just have to have a very strong rebuttal, a legal and moral case must be made.
Right, and lastly, Ms. Janjua, do you think the United Nations has a role, and if, what role can the United Nations and the international community play in ensuring peaceful coexistence?
This question that you raise about what can be done in the United Nations is not new. It has been done in the United Nations, in the Human Rights Council, in what was erstwhile the Human Rights Commission. There was a resolution that was brought about by the Pakistan delegation called the Defamation of Religions. It was brought about by Pakistan on behalf of the OIC, and we were able to get the support of a large number of members of the Commission then and Council later. But what's important is that we need to, and these processes continue, these resolutions continue in the United Nations. There are several bodies within the United Nations. The fact that some people are using the freedom of expression as the reason for the work that has been done by Charlie Hebdo and others is totally unacceptable. And as I said earlier, this was done during the period of the Nazis as well. And the result was that the person who perpetrated it was hanged by the Nuremberg trials.
Absolutely. Ms. Janjua, former Foreign Secretary of Pakistan, thank you very much for talking to Indus News exclusively. Now, we have been also joined by former Ambassador Ghalib Iqbal. Sir, thank you very much for joining with us. Now, Mr. Iqbal, the rise in Islamophobia in the West, particularly in France, has prompted the Muslim world to unite against a single cause. How can they give a comprehensive response to curb this hatred?
I think before we even talk about a response, we need to understand what is the mindset of a number of European countries, especially France. So that's an islander mentality. They think that whatever they do, whatever rules they have, whatever traditions they have, these are the things which are the ultimate in this world. So we need to give them some benefit of doubt when we talk about sending up a collective response to them. Number one. Number two, whatever they have done, I think it should be condemned in the strongest possible terms, but they feel that it's the freedom of expression. But then there is a disparity in freedom of expression. When we talk about Holocaust over there, that is one thing they would never like to hear about. And there are a number of other things which they would like to hear about. So when we talk about a response on behalf of the Islamic countries, I think it shouldn't be a response on behalf of the Islamic countries. It should be a response from the United Nations. It should be a response from the General Assembly. Because if we are going to go for blasphemy against any religion around the world, I think that is not going to create harmony in the world. Globally, we are creating chaos. And this is what France has done, and Mr. Macron has also done the same thing. And it should have not been said in the first place, because the newspaper, Charlie Hebdo, they have been doing it regularly. They were printing these cartoons, and they have been doing it regularly, and there was an attack also on the on the magazine, but it did not stop. So every time we see that things are going to go in a better way, we always see some sort of a religious attack coming up in France.
Right, absolutely. And Mr. Iqbal, we have seen a strong reaction from Muslims all over the world, as several Muslim states have also called for a boycott of the French progress. Do you think this can help build their narrative against the growing Islamophobia?
Yeah, I think, as I said earlier, it's all about economics. It's all about businesses. It's all about money. No? Because when you hurt a person who hurts you at a place where it's going to give some sort of a positive result for you, I think it always works. So even in this sort of a thing, when we talk about diplomacy, these things need to be resolved through diplomacy. But if it does not, then you need to take a step further. And that is that you need to boycott all the French goods and French products, so that the generation of employment in France gets a hit. Once it gets a hit, only then the people are going to understand what have they done. And once the pressure develops from within the boundaries of France, only then these things are going to change. Because if we keep on issuing letters, if we keep on issuing statements, that is not going to help in this cause at all. Because the more we feel hurt, the more this thing is going to go on from their side. So it's not about dividing the Muslims and non-Muslims. It is about joining hands with the silent majority of both sides of the fence. I firmly believe that when we are going to take that step, and that step would be in the right direction, only then things would work. But before that, you need to, of course, give a jolt by boycotting the products of France, and it's going to hurt them. And once it hurts, then automatically it works down and trickles down to the lowest level, and then the pressure develops among the domestic population. And that is when you see the positive results coming out.
And lastly, Mr. Iqbal, this is very important. There are fears that a discriminatory policies against Muslims can give rise to radicalization and increase the gap between people of different beliefs. Shed some light on this, please.
Yeah, you see, like when I was posted there, at that time, these youngsters started going to Syria. And we were watching that, and we even discussed it with the French. We told them that don't look the other side, because these people, when they come back, your country is going to face some upheaval, and that is going to be bad for France. They didn't listen to us in the beginning, but ultimately they understood what we meant, because we had faced a similar situation once the Soviet Union withdrew from Afghanistan. And we had those problems. So we could see that there was a problem coming up for France also. And thereafter, they started going for the intelligence sharing, and then we started discussing. And at different levels, we had a number of dialogues, and we tried to convey it to them. But these people, when they come back, what they saw in France is that they were treated like outcast people. And at the same time, they were also seeing that before they had gone, the people who were Muslims and people who were immigrants, although they spoke French, although they assimilated very well in the society over there, but they had their own separate way of life. They did not assimilate to a level whereby they would agree to things what Charlie Hebdo is doing.
Absolutely. Now, Mr. Iqbal, thank you very much for talking to Indus News exclusively. Now, moving on, Pakistan has rejected illegal amendments to land ownership laws introduced by India in occupied Kashmir. In a statement, the Foreign Office said such actions are aimed at changing the region's demography in violations of United Nations resolutions. It shows the international community to take steps to stop India from changing the distinct identity of the region. Details in this report.
India has enacted a series of new laws and amended them, allowing any of its nationals to buy land in occupied Kashmir. The new laws also allows the lands acquired by the government for industrial or commercial purposes to be disposed of or sold to any Indian. Kashmiris fear the new laws are aimed at a land grab to dilute the Muslim majority character of the region, whose autonomy was scrapped in August 2009 in violation of UN resolutions, bringing it under New Delhi's direct control. The land laws, the latest in a series of changes authorized by the Hindu right-wing Bharatiya Janata Party, were implemented on the day Kashmir observed Black Day to mark the arrival of the Indian Army in the region in 1947. India has launched several repressive measures to curb Kashmiri's indigenous freedom of movement. Rape, torture, pellet gun injuries, or extrajudicial killings, you name it. Kashmiris have been enduring these atrocities for the last many decades. According to Pakistan's Foreign Office, more than 300 innocent Kashmiris have lost their lives at the hands of Indian occupation troops in the last 1 year. Of them, 20 were killed in this month alone.
Now, Pakistan's Army Chief General Qamar Javed Bajwa has urged the armed forces to remain vigilant in the wake of recent terror attacks in the country. He was specifically referring to the martyrdom of 8 children in an IED explosion at a ceremony in Peshawar on Tuesday. The Army Chief said the enemies launched the terror attack on the day when Kashmiris around the world were observing a Black Day against the Indian occupation. He made these remarks during his visit to the Malakand division, where he inquired after the seminary attack victims' health. Touching upon other issues, the Army Chief said Pakistan will continue to support the peace process in Afghanistan. He said the fencing of the border with Afghanistan is meant to check terrorists' infiltration. Moving on, now Azerbaijan says 20 people have been killed and over 40 wounded in an Armenian missile attack near the Nagorno-Karabakh frontline. But Armenian Defense Ministry denied the report as fake. The renewed fighting over the disputed region has prompted world powers to wade into the conflict. On Tuesday, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo urged both sides to abide by a ceasefire reached earlier this month. But both sides have accused each other of violating the truce. Now, over 1,000 people, mostly soldiers, have been killed since the fighting broke out on the 27th of September. The region is internationally recognized as part of Azerbaijan but controlled by the ethnic Armenians. Now, the International Atomic Energy Agency says Iran has started building an underground centrifuge assembly plant. In an interview, agency head Rafael Grossi said Iran continues to stockpile greater amounts of low-enriched uranium. In July, the Natanz nuclear site was exploded in what Tehran called a sabotage attack. Under a 2015 nuclear deal, Iran is allowed to produce a certain amount of enriched uranium for non-military purposes, but it has been steadily exceeding the deal's limits after the US unilaterally left the agreement in 2018. Now, Lebanon and Israel have launched the second round of US broker talks over their disputed sea border. Israel's energy ministry says the delegations met at a UN peacekeeping base, It said they will assess the possibility of an agreement to enable the cultivation of natural resources in the area. The disputed area, known as Zone Number 9, is rich with oil and gas. The first round of US arbitrated talks held on October 14 ended inconclusively. Another round is expected on Thursday. Welcome back. Now moving on with the news stories. In Thailand, Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha has refused to resign despite mass protest. Speaking in the parliament, the Prime Minister said he will not run away from the problems. Chan-o-cha described the protests as illegal and ordered a stricter action against them. The Prime Minister accused some protesters of aggravated assault and violence and called for an end to the riots. Now, the opposition members told Prayuth to stop hiding behind proclamations of loyalty to the monarchy and step down. Meanwhile, protest leaders have dismissed the two-day parliamentary session as useless. The protests in Thailand have intensified a year after courts banned a political party opposing the government of Chan-o-cha. Now, over 70 million Americans have cast their ballots ahead of the U.S. presidential election on November 3rd. The U.S. Elections Project says the number represents more than half of the total turnout of the 2016 election. With just a week to go, the race for the White House is now in top gear. Both President Donald Trump and Democrat nominee Joe Biden continued to spar over the handling COVID-19 pandemic. At a campaign rally in Wisconsin, Trump claimed the number of infections and hospitalizations are down. Addressing a drive-in event in Atlanta, Georgia Democratic candidate Joe Biden said Trump had abandoned American families and surrendered to the pandemic. Biden also said Trump has failed to recognize the problems of systemic racism in the country.
The only thing that can tear America apart is America itself. No other nation can do it. Only America can tear America apart. Everybody knows who Donald Trump is. Let's show them who we are. We choose hope over fear, unity over division, science over fiction, and yes, truth over lies.
Also, polling has begun in India's second most populous state of Bihar in the first major election since the COVID-19 outbreak started in the country. New Delhi is going ahead with the vote despite India being the second worst hit country by the pandemic. With 243 seats up for grabs, the vote is being seen as a referendum on Prime Minister Narendra Modi's handling of COVID-19. The BJP has ruled the state for over a decade in alliance with a regional party, the Janata Dal, but it is yet to win Bihar on its own. Despite two successive federal wins since 2014, Modi has lost a whopping 6 state elections. Now, polling will conclude in 3 phases and votes will be counted on the 10th of November. Now, Tanzanians are voting today to elect a new president and parliament. Over 29 million people are registered to vote to decide the fate of President John Magufuli, who seeks re-election. Voters will choose from 15 presidential candidates and elect lawmakers for 264 parliamentary seats. Under Tanzania's electoral rules, the winning candidate requires a simple majority to become president. Violence broke out ahead of the vote, with the police being accused of killing 9 people in the semi-autonomous region of the Zanzibar. Opposition has also accused the government's supporters of shooting dead 2 people at an election rally. Meanwhile, the global number of COVID-19 infections has topped 44 million, with more than 1.16 million deaths. The United States is the worst hit country with 8.7 million cases, followed by India with almost 8 million infections. More details in this report.
The surging second wave of COVID-19 has forced countries to reconsider nationwide lockdowns. Number of cases in Latin American countries of Brazil, Argentina, and Mexico are spiking at an unprecedented rate. The outbreak in the U.S. is more aggressive than ever, with the country reporting a record of more than 500,000 new cases over the past week. But President Donald Trump says the reports of the spread of the virus in the U.S. is a Democratic election campaign gimmick.
And we had a spike in Miami, we had a spike in Texas, Arizona. It's all way down to very low numbers. But I'll tell you, all they want to talk about is COVID. But the good news, on the 4th, they'll stop talking. You watch. They'll stop talking. You get out that red wave, just get out. We have to win this election.
Over the past week, Europe has accounted for the greatest proportion of all new cases in the world and 1/3 of all deaths. While Britain struggles to contain the outbreak despite new policies, UK Vaccines Task Force has classified the first generation of COVID-19 vaccines being produced by Russia and other countries as imperfect and risky. The French government is mulling month-long national lockdown as country's hospitals hit record saturation in 2 weeks.
Parce qu'on sait ce qu'on a vécu.
We know what we went through last time. During the first wave, we were in it, we didn't know what to expect. Now we do know what to expect, and we are even nervous that it could be worse. Because unfortunately, with everything we are seeing in the streets, everything we are hearing, it is tough.
Meanwhile, China has reported 42 new infections in the last 24 hours. This is the country's highest daily toll in more than 2 months due to a rise in the cases in the northwestern Xinjiang region.
Meanwhile, in Pakistan, 14 more people have died of coronavirus overnight, raising the death toll to 6,759. The Health Ministry says 825 people tested positive for the virus in the past 24 hours. The ministry said there are over 11,500 active COVID-19 cases in the country. It said out of over 330,000 countrywide patients, more than 311,000 have recovered so far. The ministry also said over 144,000 cases have been detected in the Sindh province, while Punjab province has reported over 103,000 cases, while in the capital city, Islamabad, more than 19,000 have been infected so far. Now moving to Philippines, where strong winds and rains from Typhoon Malave have left 9 people dead and several others injured. Officials say the storm has so far displaced 210,000 residents. Malave is the 17th tropical cyclone battering the Southeast Asian country this year. Over in Vietnam, 2 people died and 26 fishermen went missing after the typhoon lashed the country's central coastline. Authorities have evacuated hundreds of thousands of people from the path of the storm. Vietnam has seen 9 storms this year. Also, tropical storm Zeta is heading towards the U.S. Gulf Coast after slamming Mexico overnight. Quintana Roo Governor Carlos Joaquin says the storm did not cause any serious damage. Zeta made landfall in the Yucatan Peninsula north of Tulum, Mexico, as a Category 1 hurricane. Quintana Roo State Governor Carlos Gonzalez said the hurricane did not inflict any serious damage. Gonzalez said a couple of airports have resumed regular operations.
We have to clean our streets again. We have to get our energy systems, potable water, and public services back up where they're lacking so that we can get them back up today or at least tomorrow. We hope it turns out that way and we keep moving our economic recovery forward.
Now, 2 firefighters have been injured and over 80,000 homes evacuated as Silverado fire rips through southern California. The U.S. state endured a second straight day of power shutoffs as winds whip up the blaze. California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection says Silverado has spread to about over 13,000 acres so far. It said about 750 firefighters using 14 helicopters have managed to control 5% of the fire. No casualties have been reported so far. Over 4 million acres have been scorched in the U.S. this year, along with thousands of homes destroyed and 31 lives lost. Now, 4 people have died after a boat carrying some 20 migrants capsized off the coast of Lone Plage in northern France. Authorities say 15 people have been rescued, with 8 suffering from hypothermia, while 2 are in cardiac arrest. They say rescue operation is underway for a missing migrant. Several thousand migrants have attempted the dangerous crossing of the English Channel this year. Welcome back. Now, moving on with the news stories. Colombia's Navy has seized 2 tons of cocaine that was being transported inside a semi-submersible sea vessel. The Navy says 3 suspects belonging to Colombia, Ecuador and Mexico were arrested. Officials say the submarine was escorted by the Navy to a port at the Tumaco in southwestern Colombia. The anti-narcotics officials estimate the drug's value at over $18.6 million. Now, the shipment was headed to the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, Mexico. A larger-than-life sculpture by Swiss artist Alberto is up for sale at the Sotheby's in New York. Valued at over $90 million, the Grand Theme one is being sold by an online sealed bidding strategy. Details in this report.
Swiss-born Gia Samodi is one of the best sculptures of the 20th century. Grand Femme 1 is one of 4 sculptures Gia Samodi conceived and cast in 1960. They were originally to be installed in Chase Plaza in Manhattan, but the installation never happened. Monumental sculpture could very well sell for more than $100 million, as Gia Samodi's work regularly breaks auction records. His Pointing Man was sold for $141 million in New York in 2015, the largest sum ever for a sculpture at an auction. Sotheby's has also displayed their upcoming Impressionist, Modern, and Contemporary art evening sales. Among the highlights of that sale are Mark Rothko's painting Untitled, Black on Maroon, and a Vincent van Gogh floral painting called Fleurs d'un Verre.
Well, Mexicans are honoring health workers battling COVID-19 on the Day of the Dead this year. Details in this report.
The Day of the Dead is a pre-Hispanic tradition in which families remember their dead and celebrate the continuity of life. As the world deals with the virus that risks bringing death to everyone's door, Mexico City's Musol del Carmen opens its doors with this day's offering dedicated to the health workers on the front line of the battle against the coronavirus pandemic.
These souls help the sun to set and go through the underworld to come out again. And here we show they had certain characteristics. The deceased became small hummingbirds who returned to Earth, and it was as though they returned and they could see the flowers, and people knew they were dead who had come back to life in some way.
The pandemic still afflicting much of the country, celebrations this year are a little more somber. Rather than the usual social gatherings and events, residents can explore the museum's offering at a responsible distance.
We needed spaces like this, keeping a safe distance, following protocols, so that we are able to visit and relive some of the experiences we had every year on the Day of the Dead.
Mexico's Day of the Dead celebrations are considered a cultural heritage by the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization.
Now in business stories, European stocks have fallen sharply as new restrictions in the region sink hopes of economic recovery. The spread of COVID-19 continues across the continent while the US election uncertainty compounds risk of the sentiment. Frankfurt, DAX and the CAC 40 in Paris have plummeted over 3%. The pan-European stock 600 shed over 2%, with travel and leisure stocks falling, London FTSE plunged nearly 2%, while Italy's FTSE MEB dived over 3.5%. Earlier, Asian stocks traded mixed. Now the Japanese stocks and Hong Kong's Hang Seng shed, while South Korean, Australian and mainland Chinese bourses edged up. And now let's have a look at the weather updates across the globe. With the weather updates, we come to the end of this bulletin. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.News. Take care.